And welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that wants the world to know. I'm Christy Powell, and I'm joined tonight by a co-host willing to let it show. Welcome, Nate Smith.
You know it, Christy. I'm always up for a good show.
And our guest tonight is from Next Quest Counseling and the Next Quest podcast. He's a psychotherapist and transition coach. Welcome, Noah Garcia.
Thanks, Christy. I'm Noah, and as Christy said, I am a psychotherapist. I practice as a licensed professional counselor here in Texas. I've been doing this now for about a decade, which feels crazy to say. I have my counseling practice called Next Quest Counseling, where I see clients full-time for psychotherapy. I am also what I would call a transition coach at my coaching practice, which is called Open World Coaching and Consulting. In that practice, I work with people on the how and when of transitioning from the perspective of my lived experience. And I can't emphasize enough how that is not therapy. If you have any questions about the differences between therapy and coaching, there's a good list of these on my coaching website, which is openworldcc.com. I also finance, produce, and host the podcast Next Quest Podcast, which can be found on any major podcast provider. And regarding the podcast, every week, the podcast features a local mental health professional and their practice and specialty. I really developed it as a means of being a resource to the Austin community and helping people find a good fit in a therapist.
Yeah, and it's a good time. You and I actually got to meet when I was on that podcast. I definitely encourage people to check it out. You know, we spoke on the show recently about how difficult it can be to find a good therapist. And so I feel like that's an incredible resource for anybody who's in the Austin area or really, I imagine, anybody in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the podcast features only providers licensed in Texas who practice out of Austin, but they can see anybody from anywhere in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Busy boy.
Yes, I try to be.
All right. Well, tonight, folks, we are talking about the shields we bear and the masks we wear, but we are not LARPing. So come on out, give us a call. We want to hear your coming out stories too. So if you are watching this on YouTube, if you're listening in on Discord, give us a call and be part of the conversation. And if you want to get some advice from two mental health professionals and some random Canadian, give us a call, 512-991-9242, or on the interwebs at tiny.cc/callsex, because the show is coming right now.
All right, let's jump into it. Noah, I am excited to have you here. This is honestly a topic or a question that we get on the show all the time. We get a call almost every week that's some version of, I recently discovered or I recently became X, and I'm not sure how to tell Y about it. I don't know how to talk to my partner, my mom, my family about my gender, about my atheism. I don't know how to talk to my partner about kinks or fetishes or neurodiversity or all of these kinds of topics. So I'm curious from you, what do we actually owe to other people when it comes to like sharing these adjectives and letting other people in our lives, whether they're close and personal or just strangers, in on those labels that we carry?
Short answer to your question, Christy, is that we don't know anyone shit. However, if disclosing that something makes our lives a little freer and a little easier, then it's definitely worth considering doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of framing it, that this is a totally optional idea. What are some of the adjectives that you've shared publicly, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, of course, it's always good to have boundaries. I don't believe it's necessarily healthy for everyone to know every single vulnerable thing about you.
Sure.
That's true in both my personal and professional experience. But some adjectives that I do share regarding myself and are proud of are the facts that I'm queer and a non-binary trans man. Specifically, when it comes to my gender, I've come to understand that I am most comfortable with the term bigender. This was not something I realized about myself until well into my social and medical transition, and I found that the more masculine my gender presentation, the more comfortable I felt expressing my femininity. It's such a hard word. But I really enjoy being queer and feminine through a masculine lens, and that's where I'm most comfortable.
Excellent. If I can, since we're here, can you maybe walk us through just that term by gender?
Sure. So bigender is somebody who is both male and female.
Hmm. Do people make kind of inaccurate assumptions about you or leap to a particular conclusion?
All the time. Most people assume that I'm a binary trans man given my gender presentation, but that's definitely inaccurate. Um, and as far as like correcting people, the way I correct people is generally by having these conversations and explaining what it is for me, kind of like what I just did. But there's a time and a place for that. If I'm at HEB and somebody I don't know makes an inaccurate assumption about my gender, I'm not necessarily going to take the time to correct them.
Yeah, that feels like such a important piece of this. Just figuring out who you actually want to share these things with and who is allowed in and who isn't. You use that example of being at the grocery store, but in general, how do you decide who to be transparent with?
So I decided a long time ago when I started transition that I was no longer going to put up any facades about who I am. In terms of therapy and being a therapist, to me, transparency mirrors this idea of congruence as set forth by the founding father of person-centered psychotherapy, Carl Rogers. Rogers basically says that one of the three characteristics that is needed for a relationship, a client-therapist relationship, is a therapist who is congruent, real, genuine, open, and authentic in their interactions. And when I made the decision to transition, it was really centered around my clients because I felt like if I couldn't be authentic with myself, then how could I expect my clients to be authentic with me? Um, and so within a therapeutic relationship, I'm limited because the therapy is not about me. But that doesn't mean that I still can't be myself. I'm a big fan of therapeutic self-disclosure, which, as you know, Christy, is a very fine line to walk.
It really can be. We talked about that a little bit a couple of weeks ago, but as a like kind of very out and loud and obnoxious atheist advocate, I, wouldn't want to pretend with a client that I don't have some perhaps biases or at least some like very strongly held and passionate beliefs about the cosmos and how we got here. That doesn't necessarily mean that I can't do really beautiful work with somebody who is a theist, who has a belief in God or gods or some other magical thinking that I don't necessarily line up on. But it can be really difficult to figure out like what to share and how to be opening and inviting without necessarily scaring people off.
And so to further elaborate a little bit, that was more so aimed at like being a therapist. Regarding like my personal life, as is the nature of congruence, I am always who I am. It doesn't matter the context, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But the things I choose to disclose about myself personally will vary based on the context of the interaction and my perception of the safety of the situation. So to answer your question, safety is a big thing to take into consideration when doing any sort of vulnerable self-disclosure to others.
Yeah, that's obviously going to be a important piece of all this. And we're going to, talk a little bit later about maybe how to come out and what that process might look like, for individuals and different things. But I know that one of the barriers that we hear about on this show frequently is, well, I know that I'm gay. My mother knows that I'm gay. My partner knows that I'm gay, but I'm not really allowed to tell my family until my grandmother passes, or for some reason I have to wait and and try to avoid letting my dad know, or these kinds of things. And I guess I am curious about that level of masking and choosing to keep these things secret and how to navigate that. I mean, what sort of insight can you offer somebody who is being pressured in those ways?
I mean, I think when it comes to coming out, you have to do what's best for you. Um, and as I just talked about, a big variable in this is the idea of safety, and that includes things like emotional safety, financial safety, physical safety, to name a few. Um, if you determine that you really feel like you need to come out to your family, your mom is saying don't come out to your dad, but you just really feel like you need to in order to have an authentic relationship with him, then in my opinion, you've got to do what you've got to do.
It's not about them, it's about you, is
Right.
what I'm hearing.
Right.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and it's worth really, I think, highlighting that safety piece. Not only because it's incredibly important, but it's worth remembering and maybe acknowledging to a wider audience. I don't have statistics in front of me, but the homelessness rate among trans teenagers and trans adults is absolutely staggering. I mean, I know I saw it on Facebook just today, another friend of mine asking or soliciting donations for a acquaintance who is trans and was kicked out of their home because of these kinds of issues, because of that choice to be transparent. And I never want to stifle anybody who feels like there is a need to come out, or like they don't have a choice but to come out, while also wanting to really let the audience know that there are huge swaths of our society that are being kicked out of their homes that I feel like maybe a lot of cis folks aren't aware of.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that, well, I mean, it happens in the LGBTQIA plus population with much more frequency than the rest of the population. I don't know the exact statistics, but I have read that. And yeah, I mean, it's awful. And I don't think that many people are necessarily aware of those sorts of repercussions that people face just for wanting to be themselves.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any insight you might offer for knowing when or how to draw that line? If there is something inside of you that feels like it needs to be expressed, that you are eager to be transparently and loudly and proudly yourself, how do you know which risks to take?
I mean, I think the risks that you take are the ones that, well, hold on. Let's go back to what I talked about earlier regarding like self-disclosure and safety. So regarding safety, if you know the potential risks and you feel this pressure inside of you to come out, and it goes back to living a little freer and more with more ease, then you've got to do what you've got to do, and you just have to unfortunately accept those consequences, but maybe do a little pre-planning. Maybe you get a second job and start saving up some more money and put a little stash away in anticipation of coming out and potentially being kicked out and needing to get your own place. There are things we can do to mitigate some risk, but not all risk. If you're going to come out to somebody who has a history of aggression, for example, maybe consider coming out to them via email or text, or even if it's important to you to do it in person, do it in a public place so people can be there to help you if needed. Hopefully no bystander effect, but that's another story.
Yeah, fair to say.
What do you think about if it was an uncomfortable thing? What would you think about something like writing a letter where they might find it, where they're likely to find it, and then getting the hell out of Dodge for a few hours and then coming back?
Absolutely.
Is that something that's valid?
Absolutely. I mean, there are 1,000,001 ways to come out. It's really up to you.
Right on.
Which I go back and forth, and people I think have heard me kind of wring my hands and clutch my pearls on this show before around the topic of National Coming Out Day, because I love that there is a vehicle for particularly queer youth that are maybe looking for an opportunity to share themselves at school or with their family and these different things. And I think that it can be really powerful having that communal support when you choose to come out. At the same time, I can't help but feel like it really feeds into this narrative that coming out is like a rite of passage particularly for queer folks, and this idea that only queer folks have to come out. How do you react? How do you navigate all of that?
Well, I love the idea of National Coming Out Day, and the main reason is because it centers these sorts of conversations. I know many people in my personal and professional life who have used this day as like a means of coming out and set it as a goal and, worked the rest of the year to get to that point to where they can do that. Um, and I think it's really encouraging and can help people feel less alone in doing so, and people are more readily able to like offer support because people know that people will be doing that, if that makes sense. But I don't know about coming out as a rite of passage. It depends what that means. I don't believe that coming out necessarily has to be a negative experience.
No, that's fair to say. It can definitely be a challenge, and it's one where the I think our queer audience and our atheist audience really overlaps, which is significant. I've kind of shared this story a couple of times on this show, so I'll keep it brief. But I didn't honestly feel like it was a priority to come out in a number of different ways to my family. I was kind of alienated from a lot of folks and had kind of gone through a transition with a lot of my friends. And so when I was asked to be on an ACA show where they just kind of hit me with a bunch of questions about who I was and what I believed and everything else, I kind of answered freely and then had the opportunity to share that video on my Facebook. And it was amazing the significance or the strength of the reactions I got. I don't think I expected people to have such strong feelings with regards to my religious beliefs or any of these other things. And it's amazing the way people can be kind of possessive over somebody else's identities, especially when we're talking about family.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I
When
mean,
you
I
say
think that,
strong, do you mean strong good or strong bad?
It was a mixture in my personal
Okay.
experience. It was honestly a lot of kind of hemming and hawing and being like, really? So that's what you think? That's what, and it wasn't a lot of aggression pointed towards me, but it also wasn't warm. The thing that really surprised me was just the number of people who didn't even like interact with anything that I had shared online, but who reached out to me personally about it later. I mean, I heard from all of my parents. I heard from ex-girlfriends and all kinds of different people. It was pretty surprising, actually.
Hmm. Wow. Sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
oh no, you're good. But what I was going to say is that I think coming out, it's often a mixed bag. Um, and oftentimes it's weird the way it plays out. Somebody that you thought would accept you doesn't, and somebody thought you wouldn't does. There's just no real way to predict that sometimes, I think. And I think that can be a barrier for a lot of people to coming out, is that not knowing. Because our brain, when we don't know something, our brain likes to make things up in place of that to fill that hole. And a lot of times we make a lot of assumptions, which ends up preventing us from doing what we want to do.
Yeah,
Fair to
that
say.
is so absolutely true. Like for when I came out as an atheist, it was a far more devastating and disappointing blow for my family than when I came out as gay. They really didn't even care at that point. I mean, I was in my late 20s at that point, but when I became an atheist in my early teens, I mean, that rocked their world. And that was such a big deal. And like because of that, I think that probably led me to maybe put the other thing back in my pocket so it wasn't like a double whammy. And
Sure.
so I did just kind of keep it from them for years and years. So yeah, that really hits home for me too.